So I was chatting with a viewer the other day in the comment section of one of my shorts, and since I haven't uploaded in a while, I just decided to make a video on this relatively simple topic so I can pump out a video. I've technically done Messmer and Malenia scaling in the past in my two-part series ranking all of the Remembrance bosses in Elden Ring based on lore strength, but today I'll go a little more in-depth on this specific matchup. So obviously this will be two different rounds, base to base and then Rock Goddess versus Base Serpent. I'd say both are pretty contentious. So for the first round, I do think feat-wise Malenia has to take it via fighting stronger opponents and her Scarlet Aeonia's Blast being so powerful, but this is primarily because Messmer lacks in actual feats. He beats a Divine Lion and lights Bellerat on fire. Other than that, his only real feat might not even be applicable, that being his fire burning the Shadow Tree. Now I think this is a bad representation of the matchup and a great example as to why gatekeepers have to stop only relying on feats and not statements or narrative. But before I get into that, I'll quickly explain why I don't think Messmer's fire, burning the Shadow Tree, really applies here. Basically, Messmer's fire when he's in his normal state is suppressed by the Abyssal Serpent, and he's mentally nerfed as well. So his unsealed fire, being used with no relation to him, shouldn't really scale to this version of Messmer. But now as to their statements, I think this gets highly contentious. Very highly so, and controversial as well due to the implications for Morgott that I'll bring up. So basically for Messmer, there is a statement made in the IGN interview with Miyazaki that Messmer stands on an equal footing with the other demigods and rivals them. And going a step further, I'd say this is most accurate when you interpret it as being like that with Morgott. I say this because of the constant parallels between them, being their similar placement in the world, their mommy issues, their abandonment, the slaughtering, and the fact Morgott is name-dropped in the same statement, even if it seems unrelated. Why this should be narrowed down to only one demigod though? Because saying Messmer stands on the same ground as all demigods implies that all demigods stand on the same grounds as each other, which is factually incorrect. If you disagree, I'm 100% down to hear an argument as to why Godric is relative to Malenia. Sure, you can interpret Messmer as being relative to whoever else with your own reasons, but I believe Morgott is the most accurate depiction, and for the sake of this video, I'll proceed on that presupposition. Why this matters is the fact that Morgott, especially post-DLC, is a complete monster and I think highly contends Malenia in base. My reasoning for this is Morgott's very consistent narrative. Now let's look at the statements for him. Basically the Fell Omen, which is Morgott, not even Morgott, is stated to be a horror to all who have ambitions for the Elder Tree or Lordship. I've brought up in the past, but post-DLC this is even better, because we have direct confirmation that Miquella would be included in this. Not only that, but you can make the inference that Malenia would be included by default due to that, as she was working as the Blade of Miquella. To take it a step further, Malenia refers to Miquella as the most fearsome demigod. Although this doesn't necessarily have to translate to strength, it does imply Miquella is at a certain level in the hierarchy. Now I'm not saying Morgott beats Malenia or Miquella or anything, but that's not exactly what him being a horror to them entails, but he is of great threat to them, and I think this puts Morgott himself on a similar pedestal as the Twin Prodigies. What I think also supports this is the fact that Morgott presumably almost entirely himself defended Leyndell from the threats of Radahn, Godric, Rykard, and likely most of the other demigods, not only when they came to claim their great runes, but also any who had ambitions further were stopped dead in their tracks by this man. Morgott is also the king of the primary faction in Elden Ring, as in the main one, the Golden Order. He retained Leyndell and the Golden Order's dominance for thousands of years, nearly by his lonesome, as most would never take an Omen for king. So while it is debatable whether Messmer scales to it, I do believe Morgott and Malenia are on the same playing field, no matter which direction you think the fight goes. And as you can see from my tiering video, I do believe Malenia has the edge still, but this leads into Malenia's statements, which are basically undeniable with how blatant they are. First of all, she's just stated to have unparalleled strength. There's not much more to that statement. She just has wings of unparalleled strength. And while I do question the relevance of the statement, the trailer did say that Malenia and Radahn were the strongest to remain, which does imply at least that they're the strongest fighting in the Shattering War at this point, which may not include Morgott as I've said previously, but that could include Messmer. And yes, all these statements do apply to the DLC. This isn't a long-running anime where the constant narrative retcons happen. The narrative in the base game is the same as in Shadow of the Erdtree. And it was written as one story, not two, by G.R. Martin. So, there's no real argument to be had there. So while it's questionable whether Messmer scales to Morgott, either way it seems that Malenia is at worst on an equal level or superior to him no matter what. Now for their transformed states, this is probably one of the closest matches in the lore depending on your interpretation. On one hand, it could be a one-sided slaughter for Malenia if you don't think base Messmer is on the level of her Morgott, meaning his transformed state is going to be arbitrary as well compared to hers. On the other hand, on the other more interesting hand than that, and more accurate one, this is significantly closer. While unquantifiable, Malenia's amp should be massive when transforming due to the narrative significance of achieving godhood, and with Messmer it should be the same considering the numerous parallels between his transformation and Malenia's in their cutscenes. Furthermore, while many may try to say that Malenia is the sister mentioned in Messmer's kindling, and I see the merit in that, it could also very likely be Malenia considering the flaming imagery that is often associated with her Scarlet Rot. Now, Messmer's transformation being one that isn't deific in nature can put into question as to if it really is that powerful, but it certainly is powerful, and at the very least is the level just below that. It also seems narratively disingenuous to say that Messmer is a complete fodder compared to the strongest of the demigods. I think the specifics of this matchup make it interesting though, as Messmer's fire gives him a clear advantage as it effectively counters her rot, but I don't think this exactly gives him the win. Malenia has this significant skill advantage and has a power advantage in close combat, however large, making a close quarters fight with Malenia nearly insurmountable for Messmer. Messmer would likely have to rely on long-range attacks with his fire, utilizing his superior range, but his range alone isn't going to be able to pull this off, as Rock Goddess Malenia has many counters. For one, she could easily deflect his projectile-based attacks, and she has the ability to send out the rotted clones as well. Her flight and superior speed are also going to be giving her the ability to close the gap easily if Messmer lets down his guard for even a moment. And while Messmer's serpents are good at battlefield control, what people don't seem to realize is the fact that Malenia's Scarlet Aeonias, that she can effectively spam in this form, are miles better. Messmer's flames can burn away the rot, sure, but he isn't covering himself with the flames. If Messmer gets caught in the detonation, then he's screwed, and the residuals left behind afterwards would force Messmer away from that area, or be at risk of not only external contact with the rot, but also breathing it in. It would also weaken Messmer's own control over the field, as the serpents would also be forced to work around it. Messmer does have durability negation with his fire, but again with Malenia's terrain control, superior power and skill in close quarters, ability to nullify his advantages and more, it's hard to say Messmer is going to be able to pull off a win. At worst, as we see against Radahn, Malenia is willing to sacrifice even as much as like a limb if it puts her in the position to win. So she could just rush up to Messmer while he throws a spear. While it may take out like her prosthesis, in that time she'd close the gap while his spear is temporarily gone and just execute him. So this is a late addition to the video, but as it pertains to the matchup and the general rank for Messmer, it makes sense to include. No, America-fearing Messmer does not make him this absolute fucking ungodly monster that solos Malekith of all people. Malekith is who the Messmer Glazers want Messmer to be. No, America feared the Fire Giants for the same reason as Messmer, because they had the ability to destroy what she created, they had the capacity to wipe out her kingdom, her haven. Not because they were capable of beating her ass on a 1v1. That shit is an ass argument. There's an actual argument as to why he scales to America though, but since you wankers intend to do just that, wank, use the dog shit material. I'll clue you into an actual argument as to why he does, and I'll explain us also why it doesn't do what you claim. Messmer, at least in the base Serpent state, exceeds Rennala in power due to the fact that it's stated that Rellana need more than the power of the Morna or the Carrion bloodline to even be of great use to Messmer. What this also implies is that Rellana's power wouldn't be capable of this. Therefore, Messmer is above a Prime Rennala scaling to the pre-Elden Ring Radagon scaling to America directly in physical capabilities due to sharing the same body and being accustomed to its power, and therefore Prime Rennala scales to pre-Elden Ring America. So Messmer above Prime Rennala relative to base Radagon relative to base America. It really doesn't require that much thinking, homie. Don't be dumb. Anyways, this line of scaling only applies to a base America, not the one who wields the Elden Ring, and would therefore be at least upwards of 2 times stronger than this, and by all means spanks Messmer like the son he is. So Malenia has basically all of the win cons, and while Messmer does have some of his own, they aren't as reliable, and Malenia can counter basically all of them. I do think this fight is high difficulty, but clear-cut in Malenia's favor over both rounds. although that can be lower difficulty depending on your interpretation. Anyways, I'm sorry for not uploading, but just know I do have videos in the works that I hope are satisfactory. Have a good one, everyone.